Hey, it's Jim, and this is level 2 of the CFA program, topic on ethics and professional standards, and the learning module on guidance for standards 1 through 7. They're the learning outcome statements that you've seen a handful of times. We're now on standard 6, conflicts of interest. Let me quickly give you some examples here. In standard 6A, the classic example is way back in the old days, maybe before the 1980s, where boards of directors consisted of the chief executive officer and the chief financial officer and the chief operating officer and other kinds of operating officers. Remember that the board has essentially two functions. The first one is to establish the strategic direction of the business. Second one is to hire and fire the executive leadership team. Well, hopefully you get this immediately. That the board consisted of internal employees, so it was their job to hire and fire themselves and each other. This was a tremendous conflict of interest. And by the way, it's amazing how well it did work back in those days. But we typically have lots and lots of independent directors now, so that conflict is generally been avoided. And we have a couple of good slide decks about the board of directors. Priority of transactions, there's a really cool example inside of this learning module in which there's a wealth advisor who has her parents as clients, and there's an IPO or some equity offering. And in the paragraph, we're told that the wealth advisor distributes the IPO to all of the other clients and waits to include her parents until the very end. Was this a conflict? And the answer is yes, because her parents were paying customers and paying clients, that she treated them differently. And so this is the subtlety that the Institute loves to ask on the exam. And then referral fees, there are 5 examples inside of this section. And all but one, there is a violation of this standard. And the violation of the standard is every time because the analyst or the wealth advisor did not disclose the referral fees to everybody out there that's important. So that's a quick summary of what we're going to be faced with this relatively short slide deck. So let's go back to this beginning part of conflicts of interest, and the Institute is fully aware that life is not perfect. We have relationships, we have parents, we have children, we have cousins, we have friends, we have colleagues, we have people we met on the airplane. We have all sorts of potential conflicts of interest. So the Institute is not asking us to be perfect and avoid all these things. The Institute says, look, you're going to have these conflicts. Make sure that you do not allow that conflict to influence your investment recommendation or any kind of behavior. And if you reasonably believe that it will, well, then just back away and say, you know what, I can't be a part of this. But the second part of the coin here is that we need to make sure that we tell everybody. Avoid or disclose conflicts. Prominent, delivered in plain language. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So what are the possible sources of conflicts? Compensation structures, incentives, and bonuses. And there's an example about stock options. Of course, you don't have to have direct ownership inside of a company, whether it's a share of stock or maybe preferred stock or even a bond. If you have indirect ownership with a stock option, then this, of course, is part of this source of conflict. Now, if you directly own shares of stock in a covered company, then, of course, you're going to be tempted to issue a favorable report, because if you issue a report and say, hey, this company stinks, stock price falls, well, then your spouse is going to look at you and say, what are you thinking? What are you thinking? I wanted to build a swimming pool in my backyard. Now we can't do that. I'm always fascinated by watching all the news reports, financial news, when an analyst or a wealth advisor comes on and they'll make these disclosures. And I'm always so happy that I hear about these disclosures. I never really pay attention to what they are, but I'm happy that they disclose them. And so I think this is probably one area where the Institute has had a tremendous influence in the industry. All right, 5 areas. Now remember, and every once in a while I do this. I don't think I've done it in a couple of these videos, but I want you to think about this. You know, you're going to take 90 questions in the morning, 90 questions in the afternoon. And that, by the way, that time is going to go like that. And 20%, 15 to 20% is in the ethics and professional standards. So, do the math. So what's 20% of 90? That's 2 times 9. Even I can do that. That's 18. So maybe 15 or 18 questions in the morning and the afternoon. So if you sum those, you get, 33 questions, 36 questions. Divide that by 7, right? There are 7 standards. Let's just do some easy math. So 7 goes into, 30 something 4 or 5 times. So think about this. For each of these standards, there's going to be 4 or 5 questions. And here in these key areas of note, we've got 5 key areas, but this is just in the first standard, standard 6A. So you really have to dive into this material to get the breadth and the depth so that you can be prepared for those 7 questions or so that are going to fall in this category. All right, disclosure of conflicts to employers. There are a whole bunch of example problems inside of this learning module. A couple of them have to relate to conflicts with employers because of course, we have lots and lots of skills. There's an example in there in which someone donates some of his or her time to a nonprofit and says, you know what, I'll go and I'll do whatever it is. I can't remember the exact part of the question stem. And they're not being compensated. They're donating part of it. And so is this a violation? Well, I've said this before, is that if there's ever any confusion, just go to the compliance department and say, hey, this is what I'm doing. Do I need to formally disclose this? Just make people aware. You don't want to hide anything, right? You don't want to open up the peach basket and see some rats or dirt or spiders or whatever else that you're afraid of. What's the problem here? Ability to render unbiased investment advice, parallel professional service, affiliated with a subject company. Of course, we're not acting now this is directed to the employer in the employer's best interest. And then we have the parallel example, disclosure of conflicts to the client. Notice the best practice here is just to avoid them. However, there are going to be conflicts, as I was saying just a few moments ago. Make sure that you disclose them, including family ties, relationships with banks and the firm, any kind of beneficial ownership. Remember that beneficial ownership, that's some kind of indirect ownership, which could mean lots and lots of things, including some option securities. Now, I think back in the old days, we used to, when I was going through the program, we called this, some kind of a wall, some kind of a firewall. I always use the example to my students, and I'm going to give you a silly example here. I'm guessing you guys don't know who Fred Flintstone and Barney Rubble are, but this was a cartoon that I used to watch when I was a kid. And one day they had a fight, and they built a big wall in between their houses. They were next door neighbors. So when I think of cross-departmental conflicts, I think of Barney and Fred, and they built a wall so they didn't have to see each other, they didn't have to look at each other. And so the best practice here is to build the Fred Flintstone wall and just make certain that there is some kind of a system or a process or a protocol that when the two people talk to each other, when Fred and Barney finally talk to each other, that they avoid talking about, whatever is this conflict. There's your homework assignment. Go watch an episode of The Flintstones. Here's a specific key area of note with stock ownership. And so the best thing that the firm can do is say something like, you know what, if you're going to cover a firm, just don't have any ownership in it. I go back to politicians and government leaders who say things like, you know what, I just have the S&P 500 index, or the Wilshire 5000 index or the total stock market index. And I get it. Procter & Gamble is in there, but it's a small fraction. And I own some small fraction of Procter & Gamble, but that shouldn't preclude me from covering Procter & Gamble. Now, of course, not everyone's just going to own that index. They're going to own actively managed mutual funds, or they're going to identify over or undervalued stocks and have those as part of the portfolio. So look at the orange arrow point there. The best practice is just to prohibit members from owning securities that they own, that they're going to cover. And that's probably restrictive, but if you do, make sure that you disclose that ownership and include immediate family members. Now, I'm not sure what the Institute thinks about what immediate family members are. Clearly, if this were me and I had my family, my immediate family, my nuclear family that has lived in this household, that would be part of it. But I'm best friends with my cousin. Should I include my cousin in this? From my perspective, remember, the Institute, all they want us to do is be reasonable. So yes, I would include my cousin. Now, how about my aunt who lives all the way across the country and I speak to her once or twice a year? Probably not. Here's that slide I was telling you about earlier. So with the conflict as a board member, we have the duty to the shareholders. This is what I was saying about those two roles. We also are going to be paid. Of course, we give our expertise and service to the board. We're going to be compensated for it. And then the final thing in here, and this goes back to another learning module inside of the standards. Of course, if we have non-public information, and remember what we said during that learning module is that whenever you think that you have access to private material, non-public information. And of course, if you're a board member, this is going to happen pretty regularly. You have a responsibility to tell those other board members or the executive leadership team or whoever it is to say, this is private information. You ought to go out on the steps of the building and just get a megaphone and shout it out and say, hey, we're thinking about taking over this other company over there. Of course, it probably doesn't work that way. Yeah, here's that word firewall as well. Remember, when you're on the board, you either volunteer or are assigned for various subcommittees. And the assignment or the service on those subcommittees can lead to additional conflicts of interest. And so, if you're an accountant on the board, you're probably going to be on the audit committee. That makes perfect sense. If you're a wealth advisor, you're probably going to be on the compensation committee. That makes perfect sense. But what you are likely to do here, and best practice, is for you as the wealth advisor not to talk to the accountant so that you don't have any cross conflicts. Let's end this section with a good question here. We've got Jeffrey, premium brokers. Axion has approached Clark to promote its publicly traded stock, offers a higher than average commission for each stock sold to Alliance premium brokers clients. Hey, this sounds good. Hey, good for Jeffrey, right? We all want to be the LeBron James of the financial services industry. Of course, if we're LeBron and we play for, how long has he played? 20 years, 22 years by now, however long it is. We want to be compensated. So this is not a bad thing. Ensures all his clients and the firm's compliance department. That sounds good. We like that so far. Made aware of the additional compensations with an email communication. So, back in the old days, written communication meant, you'd get a pencil out and you'd write it down and then you'd sign your name in ink. But nowadays, written communication can take lots of forms. Email communication is perfectly fine. Is Clark compliant with this? He has disclosed the nature of his compensation. No, he's recommending stocks. That creates a conflict. No, because compromises his independence. But this sounds like all this is good stuff, of course. Yes, he fully disclosed his additional arrangements. Priority of transactions, the key part of this and understanding this standard 6B is that you want to put all of your clients into the swimming pool. Put them all into the swimming pool, and then when you distribute something or you provide them with a service, you throw all of that into the swimming pool, and each particular client then can get their service. Maybe it's a raft, maybe it's a little rubber ducky. I mean, whatever it is, what we need to make certain is that we are not in that pool, and that our brother and sister are not in that pool. Right? Priority of transactions. We don't want to disadvantage the client. We don't want to benefit from transactions undertaken for clients. And so, this is the example that I give my students pretty regularly. Suppose that we've done a lot of research and we expect a company like Malibu Boats is super undervalued. And so we make this recommendation, we have all our clients go and buy, and so what do we know? We know that we're going to put in thousands of these buy orders on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, but before we do it, we slip in before them and we buy 1,000 shares for our own personal account, or the account for our brother or sister or daughter, or in my case, the account for my cousin, my aunt. She's way over there. Let's not worry about her. Also, make sure you read that third one down at the bottom, regulatory requirements for priority of transactions, both within the firm, both within the industry, and then maybe some government bodies out there have a thought about this. Here's a quick slide on hot IPOs. If we have, let's just make a simple example here. If we have 1,000 shares and we have 15 shares worth of clients, well, we can't pick and choose and give those 1,000 to our best clients. What we need to do is figure out a way to prorate them. This is what I was talking about, throwing them all in the pool so that everybody has the same allocation to those shares. Yeah, a couple of good procedures here. Restrict private placements, limit employee participation in IPOs. The best practice here is to say something like, what? Here we got an IPO. We've done lots of stuff over here on this side of the firm. We've done lots of stuff over here on this side of the firm. So we've distributed the IPO and it's now trading for, pick a number of days, 14 days, 21 days. Now we can go in and buy this on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange or in the NASDAQ market, 14 days or 21 days. That sounds like a reasonable. Let me just go back to what I was saying earlier. The Institute wants us to be reasonable. Surely if we do this after a day or 4 hours, it's probably not reasonable. Here's this concept of front running. Here's the concept of capitalizing on non-public knowledge. Here's the extra coin flip here about making sure that we disclose our personal holdings, disclose all of those trading policies, and then look at the very bottom, outlined in simple language. All right, let's end this section with another good exam question. We've got Ben, an intern, purchases a luxury car and several designer accessories during his 8-month-long internship. Well, that clearly is a signal that something is going on, unless Ben is super smart out there. I guess the idea of a luxury car and several designer accessories, that's a signal that during 8 months as an intern, you're probably not going to make that kind of capital, right? Regina is the chief compliance officer responsible for monitoring. She investigates those personal trades. He made significant profits by short selling stocks just before. All right, so there's the front running kind of a deal. Cook had omitted several personal transactions for his monthly trading. So which one of these two people, Ben or Regina, have violated the standard? I mean, you're tempted to say Cook, and that's of course the correct answer. Ben, there's no way that this is, in fact, that's illegal as well in at least some countries. But what about Regina? What did she do? How did she violate this? Notice it tells us up there, she investigates Cook's personal trades and finds, oh my gosh, so he finds this, she finds this at the end. Shouldn't she have found this at the beginning? So the answer is both of them have violated because, and this swings back to an earlier learning module, which Regina should have been monitoring, especially an intern, somebody who comes in as new, and if they're driving, after a week they're driving up in this, I don't know what a luxury car is. Maybe it's the Aston Martin from the 1964 James Bond movie Goldfinger. If the intern drove up in that thing, then and Regina ignored it, then she's violating the standards. All right, how about referral fees? Of course, the Institute doesn't want us not to be compensated. We just need to make certain that we disclose those because, well, look down at the bottom, partiality, full cost of services, that makes perfect sense. So how about two parts here? When the member receives a referral fee or when the member pays a referral fee, what's the deal? The deal is let's make certain that we disclose these. Let's make certain that all the parties involved know this. And be specific, right? What did we learn in a previous slide? It said something like in plain language. So if we're going to get a flat fee, let's suppose we get $10,000 for this. We need to make sure that 10,000 or 2% or whatever that is. Now, sometimes we have to estimate the value, and that's okay. We can use Black-Scholes-Merton option pricing model. We can use the Myron-Gordon dividend growth model. We could use Jim's credit default swap pricing model. As long as, now remember, in a previous learning module, if we're using quantitative methods, we need to make sure we test them. We need to make sure there's empirical support for providing these things so that we can get a reasonable estimate on the value. So let's end with a quick question here. Brittany works in the research department. She gets compensated for each referral. She refers numerous clients, but fails to disclose. This is what I was saying earlier. I think I said there were 5 questions in this standard 6C, and all but one of them was a violation. Well, here's an example here. Of course, there's a violation, failing to disclose. Make sure you just put failing to disclose on, 4 out of the 5, but make sure you read it and see, because the Institute, they're going to slip one of those in there where there's not a violation. So that takes us through standard 6, conflicts of interest. Let me just quickly remind you, what I've asked you to do through all these standards is go look at those nearly 40 questions at the end of this learning module. Now, you've been through 6 of them, so you ought to be able to get 6/7 of these correct. And if you listen to me, and after we do standard 7, you'll be through it 7 times. I think that gives you a great idea of those. I mean, that's 40 questions, right? And what did we say earlier? 33 questions, 35 questions, 20% of your exam. If you know those 40, that sounds to me like you're pretty close to passing grade. So, hey, I appreciate your attention and listening to me for all this time. Keep at it. Good luck studying. And I'll see you next time.